In Stockholm's old town, Gamla, the Christmas market transforms the medieval streets each December. Wooden stalls line the cobblestones, and the smell of mulled wineglag and ginger peppercaker fills the cold air. Tourists and locals browse handmade crafts. It's magical, festive, safe. But beneath the oldest buildings, in cellars that predate the market by centuries, something watches. Something that remembers when these streets knew the old ways, when offerings were left, when respect was given. This is a story about a market vendor who forgot the rules, about a Nis who demanded payment, and about the price of disrespecting tradition during the holiest season. Thomas Bergman had run a stall at the Gamla Christmas market for 5 years, selling traditional Swedish crafts like hand-carved Dala horses and woven textiles. His stall was always busy, and he made good money. This year, he'd rented the same prime spot near the big square store Torget, right beside an ancient merchant building with a red facade. The location came with access to the building's cellar for storage, a convenient perk he'd never used before. But this year, he'd ordered more stock than usual, wanting to maximize his profits. On the first day of the market, Thomas carried boxes down the narrow stone steps into the cellar. It was dark and cold, with rough stone walls and a low ceiling. The space smelled of earth and age. In a corner, he noticed a small alcove, and inside sat a hand-carved wooden bowl. It contained fresh porridge, which was strange since the cellar had been locked. He figured it was some kind of art installation, or maybe something left by the previous vendor. He dumped the porridge into a bin, wiped out the bowl, and set it aside. He needed that space for his inventory. The market opened, and Thomas's stall was immediately busy. Business was excellent. But around noon, things started going wrong. A customer claimed she'd been overcharged. Thomas checked the receipt. The price was correct. But the woman made a scene until, embarrassed, Thomas gave her a refund. 30 minutes later, another complaint. A carved ornament had broken, the customer insisting it was damaged when she bought it. Thomas knew he'd inspected every piece, but he replaced it to avoid another argument. Then another complaint, and another. By the end of the day, he'd given 5 refunds and replaced 3 items. He'd barely made a profit and was exhausted and frustrated. That night, he went down to the cellar for more stock. The bowl was back in the alcove, full of fresh porridge. Thomas stared at it. He'd thrown it away. He'd seen it empty. How was it refilled? He picked up the bowl and noticed something carved into its base. Small runes, old symbols he didn't recognize. He thought it must be some kind of antique, probably worth something. He dumped the porridge again, took the bowl upstairs, and decided he'd sell it at his stall tomorrow. Tourists loved authentic old items. The second day was worse. His cash box went missing for an hour, only to be found later under the table. Customers accused him of shortchanging them and reported items missing from their bags after purchase. The other vendors started whispering, looking at him with suspicion. Strange things kept happening. Merchandise would fall off his display table, and ornaments would break as if pushed. But there was no wind. By evening, Thomas packed up early. He went down to the cellar. The bowl was there again, in the alcove, full of porridge. This time, there were tiny footprints in the dust around it. They were child-sized, but the proportions were off. A chill ran down his spine. He looked around the cellar more carefully and noticed details he'd missed before. Small offerings tucked into crevices, a coin, a piece of cloth, a dried flower, deliberately placed. This wasn't random. It was a shrine. Someone had been leaving offerings here for a very long time, and he had disturbed it. Thomas asked the other vendors about the cellar. An older woman named Astrid, who sold candles, went pale when he described the bowl. She pulled him aside and told him he'd made a terrible mistake. The building, she explained, belonged to a Nis and had for over 400 years. The bowl was his, the porridge an offering. Every vendor who used that stall knew to leave it alone, to add a small portion of their own food or a coin from their earnings. It was a sign of respect. Thomas had not only taken the offering, he'd tried to sell the bowl, disrespecting the Nis in the worst way possible during Christmas, when spirits are most active. Astrid urged him to make amends immediately. Return the bowl, leave a generous offering, and apologize. Or the Nis would make sure he never successfully sold anything in Gamla Stan again. Thomas wanted to laugh it off as superstition, but he couldn't ignore what was happening. That night, he took the bowl back down to the cellar. He filled it with fresh porridge he'd bought from a cafe and added a small stack of coins. He spoke an apology into the darkness, feeling foolish, but he did it anyway. The third day started better, for about an hour. Then it got much, much worse. Customers began complaining that items they'd bought from his stall were cursed. One woman's Dala horse had started bleeding real blood seeping from the wood. Another's ornament was rocking back and forth on its own. A third customer claimed a textile he'd purchased was trying to strangle him at night. They brought the items back, demanding refunds, threatening to call the police. The other vendors backed away. Word spread quickly through the market. Thomas's stall was cursed. By afternoon, no one would come near him. The market organizers confronted him. They'd received multiple complaints and were considering revoking his permit. Thomas tried to explain about the Nis, the bowl, the offerings. They looked at him like he was insane. Desperate, he went back to Astrid, begging for help. She shook her head sadly. It was too late. He'd done too much damage. The Nis didn't want his offerings now. It wanted him gone. The only way to appease the spirit was to leave permanently. Thomas refused. He'd paid for the stall, invested in inventory. He couldn't just walk away. That night, he went down to the cellar, determined to confront the Nis directly. He searched every corner with a flashlight, finding only the bowl, untouched, its porridge congealing. He shouted into the darkness, telling the Nis he wasn't leaving, that it had no right to drive him away. The only reply was the echo of his own voice. Feeling ridiculous, he turned to leave. And then he saw him. In the far corner, where the shadows were deepest, stood a figure. It was small, no taller than a child, but it wasn't a child. It was hunched, wearing gray homespun clothes and a long beard, gray as winter clouds. Its eyes reflected the flashlight beam like an animal's. The Nis, real, undeniable. It just stood there, watching him with ancient, knowing eyes. And in that moment, Thomas understood. This was never his territory. He was only tolerated here by the Nis's grace, a grace he had violated. The Nis turned and walked into the wall, fading through the stone until it was gone. His hands shaking, Thomas packed up his entire stall that night. He left everything in the cellar and walked away, never to return. The next morning, the market organizers found his stall abandoned. He told them he was done. Astrid, the older vendor, who knew the traditions well, took over the space. The first thing she did was fill the bowl with fresh home-cooked porridge, coins, a piece of bread, and honey. She spoke respectfully to the Nis, thanking him for allowing her to trade at the market and expanding her business. Her stall thrived. She had the best sales of her life. And every night when she went down to the cellar, the bowl was empty, the offerings accepted. Sometimes, if she was very quiet, she could hear a low, tuneless humming coming from the corner where the shadows were deepest. The Nis was content. Thomas never returned to Gamla Stan. He'd learned about respect, about tradition, and about the old spirits that live beneath the ancient streets. Some territories are never truly yours. You only borrow them. And if you forget to pay rent, you'll be evicted, one way or another. So if you ever find yourself at the Christmas market, remember to leave the bowl full. Remember to show respect, or the Nis of Store Torget in Gamla Stan will remember you. Thanks for listening. That's a wrap on tonight's story from the Dark North. If you liked what you heard, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe for more Dark Norse content. And write a comment below to tell us where you're tuning in from.